Scott is a retired executive director of Lake Stewards Volunteer Lake Monitoring Program. He's a member of Maine Task Force on Invasive Aquatic Species and served on many technical advisory committees in development of lake and water quality protective standards for the state, local, and regional laws and ordinances, plus shoreline zoning. So he's been part of this for a very long time, and I'm really excited about what he has to share about climate change effects on our lakes and ponds. So let's get started. And he has a speaker, so I'm going to turn the fan back on.
Okay, everybody hear me? Good morning. Maybe that's too loud.
No.
Hey, Stuart.
No, that's not too loud.
Okay. Thanks for inviting me today. I'm going to sit because I'm a somewhat heat intolerant person. And I don't know if anybody else here is pining for January like I am, but it's pretty hot out there, and it's pretty hot in here. I was working on a lake yesterday afternoon about 25 miles from here, and where we measured the surface temperature of the water, it was 86 degrees. And that is historically well over 10 years higher than the average lake surface temperature 30 years ago. And that's not too much unlike what we've been seeing for the past several years. So, I'm going to be talking about, just realized that I can't see the slide screen when I'm doing this, so let's try this. All right. Let's see, not having much luck here. There we go. I'm going to be talking about what we know, or what we think we know, what we've observed so far about changes that are occurring to Maine lakes as a result of a warming climate, and also a little bit about building watershed resilience at the end, something that we're all going to be needing to think a lot more about as we go on. You may be surprised to learn that climate warming has in fact been influencing our lakes here in Maine for quite a few years now. And for those of you maybe who have grown up in Maine like I did, and have the longevity that I have, you may remember a time when it was possible to go out and skate on small lakes and ponds in Maine by Thanksgiving. I remember my father used to take my brothers and me almost every year out to skate on a nearby pond where we were living. And as I'm sure you all know, it's been a long time since that would be possible. Going out on a lake, a small lake, even a shallow pond, before Thanksgiving, you wouldn't find much to skate on. We have here in Maine, or have had some of the most clear and clean lakes in the country, actually in the world. And there are three primary reasons for that. The first is that our population, historically and still, is relatively low compared to the rest of the country, and people are a big part of the problem when our lakes are not as clear and clean, as I'm sure you all have heard before. The second factor is the geochemistry of our soils here in Maine is relatively infertile. it's highly variable, but overall, our lakes, the soils in our lake watersheds are not particularly nutrient rich. And the soils in lake watersheds have a very strong bearing on the fertility in lakes as well. And the third factor is that historically our lakes have been under ice cover for upwards of half the year. And during that period, of course, the water is cold, not very much light penetrates down into the water, so there's not much going on biologically. Well, each of these three factors is changing. Population is growing, and the development of our lake shorelines and their watersheds has been increasingly steadily for the past several decades. And with that goes a change in the soil structure as well, because people disturb the soils as they develop areas. They use fertilizers on their lawns and gardens. They have septic systems, and all of those factors have a tendency to enrich soils in the watersheds. And Maine's climate is warming, one of the fastest areas in the country, in fact. And so ice cover is not what it used to be. It's much shorter than it used to be, in fact, and this is based on some studies that have been done by a colleague of mine who works for the USGS. He and his associates looked at ice cover on a number of New England lakes, including several here in Maine, and they determined that the period of ice out, which fortunately we have a good historical record for, because in many communities there's always been an interest in when is the ice going to go out this year, so there are even contests. So we have a good historical record for ice out on a lot of lakes. And it turns out that over the past couple hundred years, the period of ice out keeps occurring earlier and earlier in the year. Now, what this doesn't take into account is the fact that the period of ice on in the winter is also occurring later, much later. And that's not something that people have paid much attention to historically, but it's very important. So we've got the period of ice cover shrinking on both ends. And that is just going to have a profound effect on lakes over time. As I mentioned, the period of ice cover is about 28 days shorter on the average over the past 150 years in northern hemisphere lakes. And there's been an acceleration of that change in the last a decade or two. And I already mentioned the third bullet point there, so I'll just keep going here. You don't really need me to tell you, really, that reduced ice cover is going to cause our lakes to warm up earlier in the spring and stay warm longer in the fall, resulting in less ice cover overall. So what are some of the implications of reduced ice cover? Well, one being that there is going to be a longer period of time during the year when sunlight is able to penetrate down into the water. And sunlight stimulates the growth of plants, both rooted aquatic plants and algae. So these plants are going to have a longer growing season. It's also going to lead to greater evaporation during the year. And that also has implications for lakes, which we'll talk about in a minute or two here. And also, this affects what's called thermal stratification, which I'm going to talk about also. So, worldwide, the average increase in temperature has been about 0.34 degrees Celsius, or about 0.6 degrees Fahrenheit, for the past several decades, or as long as we have the temperature data. This is from a study that was done by the American Geophysical Union. They looked at about 240 lakes in over 6 continents. And those numbers actually match a study that was done by the Cobbossee Watershed District up in the Winthrop area a couple of years ago. They determined pretty much the exact same thing, that they had good historical information on about 25 lakes over 4 decades. And they determined that similar to the global pattern, the temperature was increasing at the rate I mentioned a minute ago. And I mentioned earlier the high peaks in lake water temperatures during the summer, reaching in the mid-80s Fahrenheit, which is just unheard of historically. And I'm sure all of you have experienced this. When you go in the water these days, it's not nearly as bracing or refreshing as it used to be. And I remember when I was a kid growing up, my grandparents had a summer place on a nearby lake, and we would often think twice about swimming in the month of June. It was often still pretty chilly. Not so anymore. So, as I also mentioned, this temperatures we're seeing today, based on some research done by the Maine Department of Environmental Protection, has indicated that the temperatures we're seeing on the lake surfaces are about 10 degrees higher than they were 3 decades ago. This graphic just illustrates that point. So in addition to just a warming temperature, other influences of climate change on lakes are associated with extreme weather. And you've all, I'm sure, heard and read about and experienced the type of extreme weather that we're having these days, both in terms of temperature, precipitation, drought, and wind. A study that was done a number of years ago by NOAA shows the percentage increase in extreme downpours that has been occurring in recent years. And you can see that New England has about the highest percentage. And of the New England states, Maine has the highest percentage. And of the state, in the state of Maine, Oxford County is the worst. So Oxford County is now considered to be the most flood-prone county in the state of Maine. And in recent years, we've all seen storm events where roads have been washed out, lots of soil erosion taking place. On the other end of that continuum, we're also in between those very wet years where we see lots of rain events, some of them extreme, like last year. We're seeing lots of drought years where we don't get much of any rain at all. So we're kind of swinging from one end of the continuum to the other. This map just illustrates the extent of drought that has occurred over the past couple of decades, and we've had some historically very, very dry years here in Maine. You've all heard about phosphorus, I'm sure. Phosphorus is the big enemy of Maine lakes. It's a nutrient that's ubiquitous. It's out there everywhere. It's in the soils. It's in fertilizers. We've all got lots of phosphorus inside of us. But it's a nutrient that is naturally occurring in relatively low concentrations in lakes. So small that we measure it in parts per billion. And it doesn't take much of an increase in phosphorus to significantly change the amount of algae growing in lakes, which affects how clear the water is. It also affects the concentration of oxygen in the water over time. So our clearest and cleanest lakes here in Maine, like Thompson Lake, which is not far from here at all, have phosphorus concentrations down around 4 or 5 parts per billion. Very, very low. It doesn't take much of an increase in phosphorus to reach the point where lakes start experiencing algae blooms, similar to what we see in the photograph in the lower right there. That's Senatus Pond, I think that's where I took that picture a few years ago, having a raging algae bloom, and the increase in phosphorus was only about 10 parts per billion. It went from 5 to 15. So that gives you some perspective on how sensitive lakes are to this particular nutrient. And I think I pretty much mentioned all of these things at this point. Algae blooms are not pleasant. Not many people would be inclined to swim in water that looks like the previous slide in the lower right. And that used to be the primary concern, really, when people thought about algae blooms in lakes. But we've learned in recent years that what we once referred to as blue-green algae are now referred to as cyanobacteria, which are simply bacteria that are capable of carrying out photosynthesis like plants do. And some of these bacteria produce what are called cyanotoxins, which can be toxic to wildlife, domestic pets, and people. Produce neurotoxins, they produce liver toxins, and they can produce skin irritants. It doesn't always happen with every algae bloom, but it happens often enough so that people need to be wary about going into water where an algae bloom is taking place. There are natural sources of phosphorus out there, such as the ones listed here. And then there are those associated with what we refer to as external sources from the lake, associated with people and development. And you've probably seen this laundry list or something like it before, so I won't go down through all of that with you. So extreme rain events tend to cause erosion problems, and soil erosion tends to wash soil and whatever else is out there through the stormwater runoff into streams that run into lakes, sometimes directly overland into lakes. So as a result of the increase in extreme weather events that we're having these days, there's lots more soil erosion taking place, lots more phosphorus, which is in the soils, getting into lakes. And we're starting to see the impact of that. When we talk about the threats of phosphorus and erosion, it's important to note that we're not just talking about shoreline areas, we're talking about the entire lake watershed, the entire area that drains, land area that drains down into the lake, which can be situated miles away from the actual lake itself. So we have to be conscious of that, aware of it. There are also internal sources of phosphorus in lakes. Phosphorus and other nutrients and sediment accumulates in the bottom of lakes over years, but much of that material is not available biologically to the algae in the overlying water, because we typically have lots of iron in the soils in the bottoms of our lakes, and phosphorus fortunately binds to iron and is immobilized. But under certain circumstances, that can change. We'll talk a little bit about that. So on the left is a is a image of a lake that has plenty of oxygen. And all of the phosphorus and aluminum and other stuff that binds with the stuff that binds with phosphorus keeps it in place. Now, what can change that very rapidly is when the oxygen levels in the water, lake water, begin to drop and reach a critically low threshold. And when that occurs, there's a change in the lake chemistry that affects the bond that holds the phosphorus, binds the phosphorus to iron and aluminum, well, primarily to iron. And under those circumstances, all that phosphorus, which has been stored over time, can be released, and it can cause a very dramatic change in the lake over a very short period of time. We started to see that happen in some lakes. So low oxygen is basically caused by lots of algae in the water, which decomposes, and in the process of decomposition of the algae, the bacteria consume oxygen. And that's one of the reasons why when we monitor the lakes, like those here in this area, one of the key indicators we look at is the amount of oxygen in the water from the surface all the way down to the bottom of the lake. And this is just another illustration of what I just said, so keep right on going here. There are also other internal sources of phosphorus, which include the resuspension of bottom sediments from wind and wave action. That's a normal phenomenon that we can't do very much about. Shallow lakes and ponds are more susceptible to this particular phenomenon. But power boats also can resuspend sediments, not just natural factors, and we're seeing more and more of that as people have bigger and bigger and bigger boats and motors, including wake boats now, which really tend to resuspend the bottom sediments, and they bring some of those nutrients up into the water column where they can be taken up by algae. So that's another threat, not necessarily climate change related, but something to be aware of. This is a new one. Historically, winter in Maine has meant lots of snow on the ground, lots of snow, feet of snow. But it's not like that anymore. We occasionally get a foot of snowfall these days. A foot of snowfall these days is a big storm. We don't really see that many storms of that magnitude. We're more likely to see what are called rain on snow events. I'm sure many of you have experienced that. We get a nice snowfall, and then at the very tail end, we get some rain. And that, of course, means lots of ice formation and other things, but it also means that when we have these rain on snow events, nutrients which are normally not being washed, typically stormwater runoff in the winter is not common. But we're starting to see more of it as a result of these rain on snow events. And these two graphics came from a study that was done through a National Science Foundation grant to the University of Vermont, in which they looked at the implications of rain on snow events in the mobilization of phosphorus and other nutrients during the winter months. And what they found was what they speculated was there's still more studying to be done in this realm. But we've actually started seeing it from, I was talking with Holly Ewing from Bates College a few weeks ago, and she and her students have gone out and documented the runoff and the concentration of nutrients associated with a rain on snow event during the winter months. So this is an entirely new phenomenon that we're starting to experience, which puts a lot of pressure on lakes. This is a picture of a rain on snow event. So let's talk a little bit about lake responses to warming and to extreme weather. This is a graphic of changes in ISO for Lake Auburn. Lake Auburn is the public water supply for the Lewis and Auburn area. So the Auburn Water District is a very good historical record of ice updates. And as you can see, a pretty dramatic change from 1850 to the year 2000 in ice updates. Lake Auburn is historically a clear, deep lake. It's about 135 feet at its deepest point. It's had historically good water quality. If that were not the case, it would not be used as a public drinking water source. But in 2012, the lake experienced a severe algae bloom that not only caused the lake water to go from being very clear, being able to see down into the water typically 25 or 30 feet, to only being able to see down about 3 feet. And also the lake trout population during the algae bloom crashed, and the lake was just covered with, it was a tragic situation. Beautiful, large lake trout that just didn't have enough oxygen as a result of all that algae. I mentioned earlier that one of the effects of very warm summers is more evaporation. And evaporation has a number of implications. It causes the water level to drop in lakes. That exposes a lot of very sensitive area around the shoreline to drying, the effects of drying. Those areas serve as nurseries for fish and for a lot of other critters in lake ecosystems. Also, as a lake evaporates, as the water evaporates and as the water level drops down, there's a smaller volume of water in the lake. And the largest volume in a lake is that volume right near the surface, as you can see from this profile cross-section of the lake. So there's a drop of only 4 or 5 inches can be a very significant percentage of the overall volume in the lake. And the less volume of water there is in the lake, the more easily that volume of water is going to heat up during the summer. So to just use a comparison, it takes more heat to warm up a gallon of water than it does a quart of water. So as lake volumes decline because of evaporation, they're likely to warm up more quickly. Here's a picture of a drought year on Swan Lake. It's a coastal lake during a historical drought about 10 years ago. So this is kind of a summary narrative. Short periods of ice cover, warmer water temperatures, more intense storm events, runoff from lake watersheds and other factors are very likely going to lead to overall less clear lakes in the future. I guess you figured that out already. And one of the reasons for that is that there's going to be a shift in the types of algae that are dominating our lakes. On the left side here, we see what is called a normal succession of the different types of algae that typically dominate the lake during the spring, summer, and fall months. And on the right-hand side is our projection of what things are likely to look like in the future. And you can see what has changed between the two is the much larger peak in blue-green algae or cyanobacteria. And that is because cyanobacteria do well under under two conditions. There are two requirements. One is high concentrations of phosphorus. We've already talked about how and when that's going to take place. The other is warmer temperatures. Cyanobacteria do much better in warmer water. So you put the two together, and it's likely to change things quite substantially over time. And I mentioned previously, our big concern these days with cyanobacteria are what are referred to as HABs, or harmful algal blooms, because they have the potential to produce toxins. Another factor that is going to very likely affect how clear our lakes are, and we actually had a very good illustration of that last summer, is what we refer to as the brownification of Maine lakes. Now, I'm sure you've all seen some lakes and ponds which do have a sort of a natural tea-like color to them. And that is a natural phenomenon caused by the release of what are referred to as humic acids, humic compounds, from decaying organic matter, tree leaves and aquatic plants, and terrestrial plants. But the reason that we expect to start seeing this on other lakes, where it has not occurred historically, is that because we have a much longer growing season during the year for both aquatic plants and terrestrial plants. And the growing season now extends to, we used to have, I live over in the town of Buckfield, and our first frost used to be sometime around the second week of September. We often don't see frost now until the end of October, sometimes even November. So the longer the period of time that we have for organic matter on the ground to break down through microbial action, the more soluble all that material becomes. So when it rains, all that stuff runs off into streams, into lakes, and it imparts that brown tint to the water. And we saw a very good example of that last summer with all the rain that we had. And the preceding years have been droughty, very, very hot and droughty. So all that rain last summer brought a tremendous amount of these humic compounds into lakes. And for virtually every lake that we monitored throughout the state, the concentration of color went from whatever the average was for that particular lake to that. And some of you probably noticed that last summer. It was quite observable. You don't have to have a trained eye to just kind of look at the water and think it just doesn't look the same. So, these compounds cause the water to become brown. Will cause the water to become less clear. Another big factor is what's called the albedo factor, which albedo is a reflection coefficient. Brown or dark water absorbs more heat from the sun than clear water. So when a lake starts to become more brown, it's going to absorb more sunlight. So it's kind of an amplification of the already high temperatures that we're experiencing. Reduces light reflection, reduces heat absorption. This also changes what are called mixing dynamics of lakes, which we'll talk about here in just a second. And the increased color can also interfere with the way the aquatic ecosystem functions. Many studies have been done in Scandinavia have shown that aquatic insects, which are a very important part of the overall food chain in lakes, that their normal ecology can be altered by brownification. Also, if the lake happens to be used for a drinking water source, the ischemic compounds can produce hazardous disinfection byproducts with it right now. So when we talk about a lake mixing, this is how it goes for most lakes and ponds, except for those that are very shallow. Typically during the months of the year, in the spring when the ice melts, the temperature is more or less uniform from the top of the lake down to the deepest point. During that time, there's relatively little thermal resistance to mixing. So when the wind blows, the lake mixes, oxygen levels stay high, everything is good. During the summer, we experience what's called thermal stratification or layering of temperatures. You have the warmest layer on the surface, then there's a thermocline transition zone, and then this big mass of cold water down below. And during the summer months, when the wind blows, only that surface layer mixes. As we move into the fall months, the days get shorter, and the temperatures begin to drop, the thermal barriers to mixing break down, and the lake mixes again. And so that's the annual cycle. And so many lakes that do lose some, or in some cases, all of the oxygen, their oxygen in the summer, that oxygen is replenished. The late summer, early fall, the lake gets mixed, and all is good. And this is a process that has so much to do with how each individual lake, and every lake that I've monitored over the years, hundreds of them, they're all individual, they're all different in so many ways, unique characteristics. And a lot of that has to do with how they stratify during the summer. That's going to change. Because we're already seeing this much earlier onset of thermal stratification. Very soon after ice goes out and the water heats up more quickly, as a result of that, there is more oxygen loss that's taking place, partly because warmer water holds less oxygen than the colder water, but also because there's less mixing of the lake below the surface. Because it's a very warm layer on the surface that just inhibits mixing. And this is a graphic that shows the changes that the Maine Department of Environmental Protection has recorded in the depth of the thermocline, that layer where the transition from the warm water to the cold water takes place. And it's changing over time. And more significantly is this one, the deepest layer, that big cold mass of water on the bottom of the lake during the summer. The temperature is actually dropping there. And this is counterintuitive. You think, well, why is that happening? It's because the water at the surface is warming up so quickly that it's inhibiting the mixing of the water below for a longer period of time. And because of that massive water at the bottom, over a period of sometimes several months now, is slowly losing its oxygen and its biological matter breaks down. So we're likely to see greater oxygen loss in many lakes as a result of this phenomenon. Moreover, there are many lakes, as I mentioned earlier, that do not experience this thermal stratification or layering during the summer because they're shallow, and it doesn't take much wind energy to mix a lake. If the lake is, let's say, only 10 or 12 or 14, 16, whatever feet deep. But as the temperature increases and there's more what's called a thermal resistance mixing, shallow lakes that have not stratified and have mixed during the summer, which is a good thing, are likely to experience stratification. And we have in fact started to observe and document that phenomenon as well. And those lakes could change very dramatically as a result. So this is just a summary of what I've been discussing here, that the surface water is going to be warm, it's going to be too warm, and the cold water is going to be losing oxygen more rapidly than it has in the past. It's not going to be mixing. So if we look at this, this illustration and start at the top left, we're going to be experiencing stronger storm events, more extreme weather, resulting in more runoff erosion, resulting in increasing nutrients in your stormwater runoff, and that is likely to cause more algae growth. If we look at it from the bottom end of things, warmer water temperatures, longer periods of thermal stratification, more release of oxygen from the bottom sediments, also going to stimulate algae growth. So no matter how you get there, that's what we're likely to be looking at in the future. More algae growth, poor water clarity, lower oxygen concentrations, changes in fishery habitat. You may have heard the term cultural eutrophication, which simply refers to how a lake changes over time. It becomes more nutrient rich as a result of human activity. Climate warming is going to put the pedal to the metal on cultural eutrophication. It's going to, cultural eutrophication is speeding up, if you will, of a natural process which changes the lake or experiences over hundreds, thousands of years. Climate change is going to accelerate that process quite dramatically. One of the first signs that we see in some lakes of what's happening these days are referred to as ephemeral algae blooms, where you go out and you look at the water, especially along the water's edge, where the wind tends to concentrate the algae cells on the surface, and it looks something like this. And sometimes the water actually looks fairly clear underneath it, because these blooms occur quickly, and because of the excess phosphorus in the lake, especially during the late summer, and then the bloom dissipates. It can dissipate almost as quickly as it appears. But it is an early warning sign. And I know when I was working with the Lake Stewardship program, we were increasingly getting calls from people during the months of late August and September saying, is that all this stuff? Developing, accumulating along the shoreline, and what is it? And we went up to take a picture a day later, and it was gone. So it's something to be aware of. Whenever you see something like this, especially if it has discovery occurs, it's to be avoided, because those are areas of concentrated algae, and which may or may not be toxic, but no point in taking chances. Oops. Technical difficulties here. There we go. I'm sure you've probably seen or heard articles on news, stories on news about closing public beaches recently, both marine beaches and freshwater beaches, as a result of warming, higher concentrations of bacteria. That's driven primarily by overuse of the resources. As it gets warmer, there's going to be stronger pressure on these public swimming areas. More and more people are going to be using them. People don't always practice best hygiene when they're in the water, and that can lead to higher concentrations of bacteria. Oops. And again, not all algae are toxic by any means, but cyanobacteria, living algae can be toxic. So we haven't seen much of this type of signage here in Maine, but if you go to Massachusetts, even New Hampshire, southern states, it's pretty common. It's likely to become more common here, unfortunately. Climate warming is going to impact wildlife. As water levels drop, it's going to be more difficult for loons who have nesting, integrated nests in shallow areas to get out into the water. And severe rain events can cause loon nests to actually wash away. Loons being iconic birds. I mentioned earlier that as water warms, it holds less oxygen. And as oxygen levels drop in lakes, that is going to impact fisheries. And we had started to see that happen here a couple of years ago during a particularly warm summer. Many people started to see dead fish along the shoreline. Of their lakes. And the fish were sent to the pathologists of the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife who determined that because of their impact to the fish was not so much the temperature, but the fact that the warmer water was stressing the fish's immune systems, and they were becoming more susceptible to parasitic infections. So that's another potential impact. We have, many of you probably know, some of the highest value remaining perch trout fisheries in the country. And this is an app that was put together by, I think, EPA, looking at how cold water fishery habitat, cold water species being salmon primarily, how that's likely to change over time. And the areas in dark red represent current cold water fishery habitat that's likely to become warm water fishery habitat. So you can see in the state of Maine, we have one of the largest areas of currently cold water fishery habitat in the country, and that's very likely to change as a result of climate warming. Some of the toxic substances that we've all heard about, read about, that are finding their way into lakes, like mercury, unfortunately, and PFAS chemicals and lead are likely to bioaccumulate in fish, in loons, and other critters, and in people that eat fish, as a result of increased solubility of these compounds in the water as the temperature rises. So we'll talk a little bit about invasive aquatic plants. We know there's good evidence to indicate that as Maine's climate warms, many invasive aquatic plants that are not there now, there are a lot of them, are more likely to find their way into Maine waters and survive. They've not been able to do that historically because the water's been too cold. It's pretty straightforward, not very complicated science. Just for the sake of keeping things moving here, skip over some of this stuff. We have about a dozen or 15 invasive aquatic plants that are currently known to be in Maine lakes. We're doing a pretty good job of monitoring for those plants and removing them when they're found. But it's going to be harder and harder to keep up not only with the existing species that are here, but with the new ones that are likely to be arriving. And here are just a couple of ugly photographs of some of the species that are, a couple of the species that are on our watch list, our radar, that could very well survive in Maine waters because there's so much warmer in the future. And it's not just plants, it's also other organisms, like the rusty crayfish and the spiny water lily, and just other species that are going to do increasingly well as our water is warm. Some of the other phenomena that may be related to climate change, we really don't know at this point, are metaphyte on the left, which looks like sort of greenish cotton candy growing in the water. I'm sure you've all seen it. And although there hasn't been a good study done to link the increase in metaphyte growth here in Maine with the warming climate, based on the number of phone calls that we used to get at the Maine Department of Environmental Protection is from lakeshore property owners and others who are recreating the water, there is a pretty dramatic increase in many lakes in this type of algae. It's a naturally occurring algae, but there appears to be much more of it than there has been historically. We don't know for sure, but we suspect that there's a climate change link there. The same goes for Gleotrachea, which is a tiny little algae that's actually visible to the naked eye. The colonies look like fuzzy little tennis balls, but very, very tiny in the water. And we've seen some pretty dramatic increases in this type of algae in recent years. We don't know why. We suspect it may have something to do with the warming climate. I mentioned earlier the algae within the lake otter, and I won't go into a lot of detail about that right now, other than to say that this is a lake that is, again, historically been very clean and clear. We had no reason to believe that was going to change, but it did dramatically. Fortunately, it cleared up. And there was what's called an alum treatment that occurred a few years ago in the otter, in which compounds of aluminum are injected into the water. This is a picture of a barge that's doing an alum injection in the lake. And the aluminum settles to the bottom of the lake, creates a seal in the bottom sediments, which prevents the phosphorus from migrating out into the water column. It's a very effective, it can be a very effective treatment. It doesn't always work, but the technology is refining it. But it's extremely expensive. So it certainly is not nothing to be thinking, well, you really don't need to worry about all this climate change and phosphorus and stuff, because something like this is definitely a last resort. Some of you may have seen this cartoon before. We are largely responsible for climate change, and if we're going to offset the effects of climate change and protect our lakes, we're the ones that are going to have to take action. And it's not going to be a small job at all. This is a very complicated photograph, but we're now starting to think about more and more watershed resilience. What do we need to do? What can we do to make our lake watersheds and our lakes more resilient to climate change over time? This is a long list. I'm not going to read everything to you, but these are some of the things that will be essential in the process of protecting our watersheds and making them more resilient. I don't know if Jim, the watershed survey is done on any of the lakes here. Yes? Okay. Watershed surveys are great ways to engage the public. You go out there and look at what's on the ground and identify problems. And the problems are going to become easier and easier to identify. There's going to be storm events, these serious erosion problems that are taking place. So if you have not conducted a watershed survey on your lake, it's basically a pretty simple process. There's money available to help organizations conduct these surveys, and volunteers in the community play a very big role. So something for you to consider. Ongoing monitoring efforts at the time you should have here, where volunteers are going out and checking the vital signs of your lakes, making sure that you have a handle on changes that are taking place, really important. And all of the types of things that we've been doing historically, all of the conservation practices that I'm sure you've heard about, are going to be so much more important. We're going to need to ramp up that process substantially if we want to keep up with the effects of climate warming. This one's my favorite. This is nature's own best way to protect the lake. Naturally forested, not preserved buffer system, vegetated buffer. These not only are very effective traps for nutrients like phosphorus, but they also, in terms of the climate change benefit, they tend to keep the temperature down on the land. If you're keeping the temperature down on the land surface, you're keeping the temperature down in the lake. As water passes through the terrestrial system, it reaches the lake. So buffers for shoreline areas, for streams, are going to become so much more important in terms of keeping lake water temperatures down. Just go over that one. This is a bit of a tricky one. I mentioned earlier that as this evaporation takes place, it's easier to move lake water to warm off as a result of air temperatures. So ideally, keeping the water level relatively high is the best way if you have the ability to do so, protecting against that particular issue. But there's a big caveat here in that you really need to be able to address something like one of these huge storms that we have that dump 4 or 5 inches of rain on us. And if the water level is already too high, it can raise it to the point where it causes erosion of shoreline areas and moves the water closer to the development area. So, in theory, it's a good way to create a thermal resistance to increased water temperatures. But unless you have the ability to regulate the water level through a dam structure that can be manipulated, it can be pretty tricky. Land trusts can play a very important role in helping to protect our watersheds. If you have a land trust in the area that you're working with, that can go a long way toward protecting the watershed. There is money available through the state of Maine for what are called community resilience grants. And I'm not going to go into any detail about these right now, but they're intended very specifically to deal with all of the types of threats that we've been talking about here. And there's an organization that have a lower rate, a corner called C, which stands for the Center for an Ecology-Based Environment. They're located in the town of Norway. They can help communities obtain these grants. So if that's something you're interested in, contact C. So basically, we're warning and preparing. Climate change is going to amplify pretty much all of the known existing threats to our lakes. And while some of this is theoretical, we have enough data in hand at this point in time to be able to say we can see this coming. It's very likely to happen. If we don't, this is unfortunately where we're going to be in moving not that many years. That was a long presentation. I hope I didn't go over. We have time for questions. Yeah, that's a question I don't get very often. The question is, I think I understood you to say, what is the threat from runoff from ski areas, from the snow and maybe some of the chemicals that are put in the snow when they're making snow? Did I get that right? Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah. It's something to take into account. And many of the ski areas now have created containment ponds to basically slow down the runoff so that it doesn't overwhelm the infrastructure and cause so much damage. If that's not the case, and I'm assuming you're talking about Mount Abrams, that's something that should be considered. Those ponds, they can reduce the peak flow of runoff. They can also act as a settling pond for some of the nutrients and the eroded soil particles. Yeah, that was pretty extreme.
What would you say about breaking underwater at the shore, breaking of the leaves, taking out from the water along the shore?
Are you asking me as a biologist or as a shorefront property owner? As a biologist, I would say leave it alone. Well, did you say in the water?
Yeah, the leaves that are off and in the shore.
If the leaves are if the leaves are in the water, there are a lot of critters at the base of the food chain that break down those leaves and use the nutrients, aquatic insects that are fed upon by fish in the nursery areas along the water's edge. So they serve a purpose. And they, historically, before we ever came along, lakes were surrounded by trees and the leaves fell into the water and it didn't really cause any problems. Is raking banned? Is that what you asked? I'm trying to make sure I understand your question. So you're asking, is it okay to... Not in the lake, but along the water's edge, on the land. You should let it go, yeah, because, what happens is that, lawns are not very effective filters at all. In fact, they tend to contribute more than they tend to, yes? I would have to take issue with you on that. You're right. There have been a lot of different studies that have shown that a grassy swale can be an effective filter, but not a cropped lawn, especially since lawns are also almost always fertilized. Lawns are also almost always fertilized. So that, pardon me? No, they don't have to be. But if you compare runoff let's say, a naturally occurring forested area where you have accumulated duff there, that duff there is going to absorb a lot more runoff than the lawn is going to. I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
Maybe something to just look into later.
Yeah, I mean, it flies in the face of recommendations of environmental agencies throughout the country. There are lots of other issues with lines. They're all monoculture basically, so they don't have nearly the diversity that a natural forest floor does, and all the benefits that brings to the ecosystem as well. Good subject for debate.
Last year, at the end of the season, we had, I think they're called zones.
Zones.
And several portions of the lake that we have. And one of our neighbors, I think, contacted Jim Chandler about it, and he said that's a good thing to have. I'm not exactly sure why.
Some of you may have seen bryozoan colonies. They look pretty creepy if you haven't seen them before. Sometimes they'll form on a stick underwater, or on or somebody has a rope that goes to that's anchoring their dock. You get these football size, sometimes even bigger, gelatinous blobs that form. And those blobs consist of these tiny little critters that filter the water. And so we only see bryozoan colonies on clear lakes. They are generally an indicator of good water quality. They do absolutely no harm. They're not going to. They also fish feed on them. You'll sometimes see holes punched in the side where fish will go along. And so they're largely beneficial, and they're a good indicator of water quality.
Thank you.
Well, to answer the second part first, periodically ditches need to be cleaned out because if you don't, they fail. And if they fail, they tend to wash the roads out, and that can become an even bigger problem. But what the towns should be doing, and the state, is when they do clean a ditch out, they should then revegetate it. And that's where, the use of these woven mats and other materials that allow grass to grow up in between them and stabilize the soil can make a big difference. So there's all kinds of information out there available to towns on how to do that and how to minimize that problem, but it's a slow process to get Oh, if somebody has an active erosion site on their property, and it can be shown that the runoff from that site is getting into a stream or somehow running into a lake, then they're in violation of Maine's erosion sediment control law and also the Natural Resources Protection Act. And so you can either talk to your local code enforcement officer, or if you've got documentation that the stuff is running into the lake, take pictures of it, and talk to somebody at the Maine DEP. Feel free to cut me off anytime.
Any more questions?
Along with the town's responsibility for ditching, what if those ditches cause erosion? Now that they haven't taken care of ditches, they built up roads, water comes over the road, property. Is the town responsible for making sure that this does not happen?
Well, it's certainly in the town's best interest because it costs a lot more to repair the road problems that you're talking about because the ditch isn't functioning properly than it does to maintain the ditch. So, yeah, it's the dollars and cents should get the town's attention. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, our next speaker is Jeannie Cranmer. She's going to talk about wetlands.
Thank you so much. Everybody here? I'll take it loud as I can. We now hold wetlands 700 acres. Thank you for all your service. I have to give a plug to Land Trust after this speech. In particular, the Portland Water District and Sebago Lake has made an exerted effort to tie in all the way up to Albany, so that those parcels of forest land will stay there and not be developed. That's what Land Trust is doing all across the state. Support Land Trust. Specifically about Fox Ledge, our next step is we now have a road that takes you up halfway up the side. We're going to get a great view. We're going to be building an accessible trail, which means a loop that anybody can walk on. You with your heart problems, you with your walker, somebody in a wheelchair. That's what we're working on. We'll probably be next summer. I have information about it. But right now, you have a heart problem, you just had hip surgery, you can now drive up, access over Fox Ledge, and you can have a view. The whole intent is just to increase access for all. We recently purchased Echo Lane, which is across from Woodstock Elementary School. We've had all of the kids in Woodstock School climb trails to Fox Ledge from their school. That's what we're working on, that's what we're going to support for. Thank you. Drive up our way. There's parking in the driveway place. You have to build parking into it. Then you park your car. You can walk on top of which is not as steep. You can also just look at the view and enjoy it. It's for everybody. Access for any forest is for everybody. Yes. It's what? No, the gate is open. There's a sign at the gate that says, gate is open. If you're able to walk, please walk. If you're not able to hike, drive and enjoy it. Open it down. The road is free. There was a heavy storm last Okay, folks, it's warm in here, so I'm not trying to do this as possible. But if you have questions, don't be afraid to reach out to me at any point. Last year's financial results, real quick, our total expenses, we were under budget by $1,800. Waterways expenses were under $600. Our total income, a little shy of budgeted for $12,000 in membership support. We're appreciative of all you do. Please don't take too long when I say that. Every penny try to stretch as far as we can. In total, actually spent $466,000 for the budget. So we're doing well. Next slide. For 2024, we have budgeted general expenses just over $9,000. The millionaire expenses, money is always going up, costs is $10,000 this year. Our grant is going to be close to $19,000. We're budgeting for almost $19,000 in grants, membership support, and town support. We're estimated to be a little above, I'm sorry, yes, $5,000 above our consensus this year. Hopefully, we get all those numbers, and we have about 130 assessment numbers. I hope I have my speech, expect enough. I also mentioned this is very normal. We know how much to use the alcohol on our road. People there look about that. It has air conditioning and it has a stop on the same words. So we may make you change your road next year. And thank you all for coming today.
phosphorus, likely up to 20 parts per billion. Still expects the range. No, the worst ratio is 12. There's also oxygen, second, there's also oxygen here. One worst ratio is also water take. We try to that to small also on the 6 degrees. And
Thank you. they went there and tested to see how many they were on the and dropped off the street and if there was kind of tested.
Invasive species continue.
We also every year we hire handful of such district. Actually, one of our this district. They're here this year. Used to come Monday, Thursday. This year, Thursday, Friday, Tuesday. Please meet to all the info. He also hired Simon Smith to kind of keep make sure that when things goes back, we getting the whole world. We want to let go times put us on that. Outside of a little bit of few things. Like I said, in the out we much less like so just keeping our grandmother had to do this we very late making progress. It's a long slow process. Really, make those persons really just any questions?
Thought I'd do something a little bit different this year. Asking specific questions. bases of the freeways, acceleration, hydro, and currently defined. And 8 in Milford with rivers. Yes. A lot of people think it's moving water, but Songo River, which flows from Greenwood on at the end of the south end of Long Lake, Mississippi, has so I'm not going to go through this, this is a lot of already, this is what's common, move forward, next, go to the next page. And these are so we don't need to talk about cyanobacteria because we've already talked about it, but we do want to emphasize that harmful humans, wildlife, fish, cats, and the dirt box include now ALS. So we're creating neurological disorders. Can anybody tell me how long it takes to kill a dog if they can drink cyanobacteria? How many? 3 to 4 minutes. So really have to be careful about cats. So just an interesting tidbit. They stop when it's which is 21 miles long, 1 mile, 9 miles wide, and 69 square miles as what's happening is way more occurrences. They wrote the record of the highest for cyanobacteria advisors ever recorded in New York City. And then took them on, they did the software. So they're really doing a good job tracking. And the average group lasts up to 2 years. So that does the pond has cyanobacteria. Okay. And there's a part of ALS model. And we're going to get this I will have right on the website. Yeah. So we want to more about okay. So our IPPs. This is our IPP case. So I want to thank some of the folks that taken our IPP training and contacted us because they found suspect. So let's examine on your cons what was this plan. Just like it's not easy for parents to do but there are eyes, ears, and cons, and when you do find something, you need to please contact us and have us Jen, Christopher, and we asked for more legend, scribes, you wouldn't know it's there. She had rise upon first Kimberly, sister. Oh, okay. Kimberly, Los Angeles, fortunately, they native New snails are native except for the baby ones. If you saw a picture of the big snail that's bigger than the water, those ones are. They are for you can pick them. Sometimes we'll have pick a day and snail ones and some. But it's really no other way. It's like taking them out of my arm and the ducks have some. So the annual group count, in 2023, there was 1,503 volunteers for the groups except for lake. And they monitored more lakes since the town began in the spring. So the estimated population is 2,299 adults. Last year it was 178 chickens. Last year it was 298. So they only go for the southern part of the state, the southern half. So what they do is do a projection. Projection population is 2,894 chickens. So we saw it on that time.
Where parts of the southern part of the state? Where we're located at?
Yeah, so 45th parallel. So it goes from 82 cows and down. So it's quite a bit. Yeah, it's only half out. What you see is so this is the chart which shows the goals, the chickens. The top line is goals, the bottom is chickens. There's quite a bit of fluctuations in the chickens. We had one year in 2011 where there were many chickens. Okay. And it's more, I'm not going to cover that because we already did it. It's got a great job. This was the work that ground fill the water, even if not grass, so lakes farm. Recommends that we have shrubs, a narrow path instead of wide open area soil water. Yes. Yes. We have a lot of training, people who come out with the
We have a questionnaire here, that's the first step, when you're smart, you know your property. Anybody wants a questionnaire, just raise your hand.
So it's a typical analysis, inspection, and we provide recommendations on what to do to make and it's all voluntary. Everything is voluntary. So I picked this up in late fingers and late conference, and I thought it was pretty interesting. The impact of these lakes and the amount of money it brings into the state. So we end up having issues with scientific or out of it's definitely an impact state. Plus, every other concern I have is state that's not aware that can't swim, say, bacteria, or should swim. That's the reason and this was kind of interesting at the conference. The DEP did talk this fire area. She don't want to do it, and take away the school, where you can't do that. So, if anybody wants a copy of their response to the question,
basically in charge of the website and Facebook page. So our Facebook page, Western Maine Community Units Association, Western Maine years ago, it's on Facebook. So we're really doing this association. That is our Facebook page. So our email address, in the top bar there, is our website. Go to Google and you search on Community Associations or website for a source results online. We have letters that are online on the website and also several places around this area. Notice that at the grocery store, it seems to pretty fast. Fill that in every 2 to 3 weeks. We're also both towns, Woodstock, and Greenwood, the local and then all of the some of our meetings that we done last and they online now for membership donations. It's done through PayPal account, we have a card, which don't usually have that. And there's also several have Facebook groups, a lot of information, a lot of pictures, stuff posted, questions from my brothers, changing tax also very good websites, also Facebook. Any questions? Thank you.
And next is the election of officers.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you for coming in.
You're a very nice job.
Oh, thank you.
Good work.
Get older, I stumble a bit.
Hey.
Yeah?
Yep.